When wealthy mine owner Marcus Blackwood spotted two desperate boys selling their most precious possessions on the dusty streets of 1867 Wyoming Territory, he had no idea that his simple act of kindness would unleash a chain of events that would threaten everything the family held dear. But what happens when helping someone you care about accidentally makes their situation even worse? Marcus Blackwood's boots made sharp clicking sounds on the wooden sidewalk as he walked through Copper Ridge on that cold October morning in 1867. The Wyoming Territory wind bit at his face, carrying the smell of smoke from dozens of chimneys and the distant sound of pickaxes hitting rock deep in the silver mines. His fancy black coat with its shiny buttons stood out like a crow among sparrows in this rough mining town where most folks wore patched clothes and worried faces. The town was waking up around him. Miners stumbled out of boarding houses, their lunch pails rattling as they headed toward the dark holes in the mountainside that had made Marcus richer than most men could dream. Store owners swept dust from their doorsteps, knowing it would blow back before noon. A dog barked somewhere, and a baby cried from an upstairs window above the general store. Marcus stopped outside Peterson's medicine shop, watching his reflection in the dirty window. At 35, he looked older than his years. His dark hair was already showing gray at the temples, and lines had formed around his eyes from squinting at ledger books by lamplight. The silver mines had given him everything money could buy, but they'd taken something too, something he couldn't quite name but felt missing every morning when he woke up in his big empty house on the hill. A woman hurried past him, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. She nodded politely but didn't meet his eyes. That's how it always was. People in Copper Ridge respected Marcus Blackwood's money, but they didn't know the man who carried it. He was like a walking bank, useful when needed, but not someone you'd invite for Sunday dinner. The bell above the medicine shop door jingled as Dr. Peterson stepped out, his medical bag in one hand and a worried look on his weathered face. Marcus had known Peterson for 3 years, ever since the doctor had arrived in town with big dreams and a small supply of medicines that never seemed to stretch far enough. "Morning, Marcus," Peterson said, tipping his hat. "Heading to the mines?" "Eventually," Marcus replied, noticing how tired the doctor looked. "You're out early." Peterson's face grew serious. "The Morrison family. Catherine's taken a turn for the worse. Been coughing up blood for 2 weeks now, and those boys of hers." He shook his head. "Jamie's trying to be the man of the house at 10 years old, and little Daniel hasn't said more than 5 words since his mother took sick." Marcus knew the name but not the family. In a town of 800 people, the wealthy mine owner somehow managed to know very few of them personally. "What can you do for her?" "There's medicine that might help, a new treatment from back east. But it costs $5, and the family doesn't have 50 cents to spare." Peterson adjusted his bag strap. "Their father died in a cave-in last spring. Been a hard year for those boys. $5. Marcus spent more than that on a single cigar. The amount seemed impossibly small and impossibly large at the same time. Small enough that he could solve the problem without thinking. Large enough that it might as well be a mountain to a family living on hope and thin soup. "I should get going," Peterson said. "Promised I'd check on her before I head out to the Jenkins place. Their baby's got the fever." Marcus watched the doctor hurry away, his boots splashing through puddles left by yesterday's rain. The morning sun was climbing higher, painting the rough buildings of Copper Ridge in shades of gold and brown. Soon the town would be fully awake, filled with the sounds of commerce and survival that marked every day in this corner of the Wyoming Territory. He started walking again, his mind stuck on Peterson's words. 2 boys trying to care for their dying mother. A 10-year-old shouldering a man's responsibilities. A younger child gone silent with grief and fear. The images bothered him in a way he couldn't shake, like a splinter working its way deeper under the skin. Marcus had been raised by servants after his own mother died when he was 12. His father, consumed with building his business empire, had handed his son's care over to others and disappeared into his work. The boy had learned early that money could buy many things: education, comfort, opportunity, but it couldn't buy back time or fill the hollow spaces where love should have lived. Now, walking through the town his silver had built, Marcus wondered what kind of man he'd become. He employed half the people in Copper Ridge, but he couldn't name a single family that would genuinely mourn if he disappeared tomorrow. He had wealth that could last 3 lifetimes, but no one to share it with or leave it to. The sound of children's voices drifted from around the corner, near the town square where a few scraggly trees provided shade in summer and shelter from wind in winter. Marcus found himself walking toward the sound, drawn by something he couldn't explain. Maybe it was Peterson's story, or maybe it was the loneliness that had been growing inside him like ice in a winter pond, getting thicker and colder with each passing season. As he rounded the corner, Marcus saw them, 2 boys kneeling beside a small wooden crate, their heads bent together in serious conversation. Even from a distance, he could see the careful way they arranged the items in their makeshift store, the hope and desperation mixed in their movements like ingredients in a recipe for heartbreak. The older boy looked up as footsteps approached, and Marcus felt his breath catch. The child's eyes held something that shouldn't exist in someone so young, a weight that spoke of nights spent listening to his mother cough and days spent figuring out how to stretch a penny into a meal. His clothes were clean but patched, his hair neatly combed despite everything falling apart around him. "Morning, mister," the boy said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his worried eyes. "You interested in some fine goods? Everything here's been well taken care of." Marcus stepped closer, studying the contents of their crate. A set of glass marbles caught the sunlight, casting tiny rainbows on the wooden sidewalk. A carved wooden horse lay nestled among some books with worn covers and pages soft from many readings. A small harmonica gleamed silver, and a pocket watch with a cracked face ticked steadily despite its damage. "This is quite a collection," Marcus said, crouching down to their level. The younger boy, Daniel, he remembered Peterson calling him, clutched the wooden horse protectively, his knuckles white with the strength of his grip. "Yes, sir," the older boy continued, his voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who'd been doing this for days. "These marbles came all the way from back east. Real glass, not just clay painted to look fancy. And this harmonica plays sweet as a songbird. I can show you if you want." Marcus picked up one of the books, recognizing it as a reader used in schools. The pages were filled with careful pencil marks where someone had practiced writing letters and words. "You boys go to school?" "When we can," the older boy admitted. "I'm Jamie Morrison, and this here's my brother Daniel. We been learning our letters real good, but—" He trailed off, glancing toward the direction of their home with worry creasing his young face. "But your mother's sick," Marcus finished gently. Jamie's carefully constructed salesman mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the frightened child underneath. "Dr. Peterson says there's medicine that might help her get better. We've been trying to raise the money ourselves, fair and square. Ma always taught us that charity's fine for giving, but asking for it makes you smaller somehow." Daniel spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. "Pa made this horse before he went to heaven." He held up the carved animal, its wooden surface smooth from countless hours of being held and loved. "It's the last thing he gave me, but Ma needs the medicine more than I need the horse." The simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was a child willing to sell his most precious possession, the last connection to his dead father, to help his mother. The sacrifice was so pure, so selfless, that it made Marcus ashamed of every dollar he'd ever spent on things he didn't need. "How much for everything?" Marcus asked, surprised by the roughness in his own voice. Jamie's eyes lit up with hope. "We were thinking maybe $5 for the whole lot? That's what the medicine costs, and these things are worth at least that much. The watch still keeps good time and—" "I'll give you 20, Marcus interrupted, pulling out his leather wallet. Both boys stared at him in shock. Daniel's grip on the wooden horse loosened slightly, and Jamie's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. "Sir, that's too much," Jamie stammered. "We can't take charity. Ma would be powerful upset if she thought we were begging." Marcus counted out the bills, his hands steady despite the strange emotion building in his chest. "This isn't charity, son. These items are worth $20 to me. Sometimes things have value that can't be measured in ordinary ways." He handed Jamie the money, watching the boy's hands shake as he accepted it. You run to your mother now. Get her that medicine. Jamie looked at the bills like they might disappear if he blinked. We should give you your things then. Keep them, Marcus said, standing up and brushing dust from his expensive coat. Every boy should have his father's horse, and those marbles look like they've got a lot of games left in them. Daniel finally smiled, the first real expression Marcus had seen from the younger child. Really, mister? I can keep Pa's horse. Really? Marcus found himself smiling back, feeling something warm spread through his chest. But you boys had better hurry. Medicine works best when it's used quickly. Jamie grabbed his brother's hand, and they ran toward home, their feet kicking up small clouds of dust as they went. Marcus watched them go, noting how Jamie slowed his pace so Daniel could keep up, how the older boy's protective instincts never wavered even in his excitement. Standing alone in the town square, Marcus realized something had changed in the past few minutes. The emptiness that had lived inside him for so long felt different somehow, not filled exactly, but no longer quite so hollow. For the first time in years, he'd done something that mattered to someone other than himself. But as he walked back toward his big house on the hill, Marcus had no idea that his act of kindness had just set in motion events that would test everything he thought he knew about wealth, power, and what it truly meant to help someone you cared about. The sharp rap of knuckles against Marcus's front door shattered the peaceful silence of his evening meal, causing him to nearly choke on his roast beef. Sheriff Coleman's weathered face appeared through the frosted glass, his expression grim as storm clouds gathering over the mountains. Marcus set down his silver fork, his stomach suddenly tight with an uneasiness he couldn't name. "Evening, Marcus," Coleman said as he stepped into the grand foyer, his muddy boots leaving dark prints on the polished marble floor. The sheriff's hat dripped with melted snow, and his coat carried the smell of horse sweat and worry. "Sorry to bother your dinner, but we got ourselves a situation that needs discussing." Marcus led him into the sitting room, noting how Coleman's eyes swept over the expensive furniture and oil paintings with the careful observation of a lawman who'd learned to read trouble in the smallest details. The fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with books that Marcus had bought but rarely read. "What kind of situation?" Marcus asked, settling into his leather chair while Coleman remained standing, too agitated to sit. "It's about the Morrison boys and what happened today." Coleman's voice carried the weight of bad news delivered too many times. Word travels fast in a town this size, especially when it involves $20 changing hands on Main Street. Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Is there a problem with helping a sick woman get medicine?" "The problem ain't with your intentions," Coleman said, pulling off his wet gloves and shoving them into his coat pockets. "It's with Cyrus Holt's reaction to hearing about it. That snake's been circling the Morrison family like a vulture ever since their father died, and your generosity just gave him the excuse he's been looking for." The name Cyrus Holt tasted bitter in Marcus's mouth. The man owned half the rental properties in Copper Ridge and had a reputation for squeezing every penny from families who had nowhere else to go. He was the kind of person who saw kindness as weakness and desperation as opportunity. "What's Holt done now?" Marcus asked, though he already feared the answer. Coleman began pacing in front of the fireplace, his boots clicking against the hardwood floor. "He went straight to Catherine Morrison's cabin this afternoon, barely an hour after the boys got home with that medicine. Told her that since the family obviously had money now, he was moving up their rent payment from the end of the month to tomorrow morning. $25, due by noon, or they're out on the street." Marcus shot to his feet, anger flooding through him like water through a broken dam. $25? That's highway robbery. The cabin's barely standing, and it's not worth $5 a month, let alone 25. "You and I both know that," Coleman agreed. "But Holt's got the legal papers and desperate people don't have many choices. Catherine Morrison's been paying $10 a month, barely scraping it together each time. Now Holt's claiming that your $20 proves they've been holding out on him." The sheriff stopped pacing and fixed Marcus with a steady look. "There's more. Holt went to the bank and convinced them that Catherine's a poor risk for the small loan she took out last month to cover some of her medical expenses. They're calling it in another $15 due by week's end. Marcus sank back into his chair, the weight of unintended consequences crushing down on his shoulders. His act of kindness, the first genuine good deed he'd performed in years, had somehow made everything worse for the family he'd tried to help. "How much does she owe in total?" he asked quietly. $40 all told. Might as well be 400 for all the chance she has of paying it. Coleman's voice softened with genuine sympathy. That woman worked herself half to death trying to keep her family together after her husband died. Now she's laid up sick, and those boys are scared out of their minds. Marcus stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and consume the seasoned wood. He'd always known that Holt was a cruel man, but using a family's moment of hope against them seemed particularly vicious, even for someone of his low character. "What's Catherine's state of mind about all this?" Marcus asked. Coleman's expression grew even more troubled. "That's the part that worries me most. When I stopped by to check on them this evening, she was talking about packing up what they could carry and leaving town tomorrow morning. Said she wouldn't let her boys see her dragged out of their home by force." The image of Catherine Morrison, sick and desperate, preparing to flee into the Wyoming wilderness with 2 young children and winter coming on, made Marcus feel physically ill. He'd seen families try to survive on the road during cold months. Most didn't make it to the next town. "She can't travel in her condition," Marcus said. "Peterson told me she's been coughing up blood. I tried telling her that, but the woman's got pride stronger than iron. She'd rather risk dying on the trail than accept what she sees as charity." Coleman moved closer to Marcus's chair. "That's why I'm here. You started this mess, even if you didn't mean to. Question is, what are you going to do to fix it?" Marcus stood again, his mind racing through possibilities. He could pay Holt directly, but that would likely make Catherine feel even more indebted. He could try to reason with the landlord, but Holt wasn't known for his reasonable nature. He could involve the law, but everything Holt had done was technically legal, if morally bankrupt. "There's something else you should know," Coleman continued. "Jamie Morrison came looking for you about an hour ago. Showed up at your door, but your housekeeper turned him away, said you were at dinner and couldn't be disturbed." Marcus felt a stab of guilt. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, followed his standing instructions about not being interrupted during meals, but he'd never considered that a desperate child might need to speak with him urgently. "What did the boy want?" "To return your money," Coleman said simply. "Every last dollar of it. Said his mother was powerful upset about taking what she couldn't earn, and that the family would find another way to get by." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was a 10-year-old boy, watching his mother potentially die from lack of medicine, willing to give back the money that could save her life because his family's pride mattered more than their survival. "Where are they now?" Marcus asked, already reaching for his coat. "Still at home, but probably not for long. Catherine was talking about leaving before dawn, trying to get a head start before Holt could cause more trouble." Coleman headed toward the door. "If you're planning to do something, Marcus, you'd better do it fast. That family's about to disappear into the wilderness, and once they're gone, finding them again will be near impossible." Marcus grabbed his hat and coat, his mind already working on a plan that went far beyond simply paying their debts. If he was going to help the Morrison family, he needed to do it in a way that preserved their dignity while protecting them from future harm. Snow had begun falling in earnest by the time Marcus reached the Morrison cabin, each flake catching the lamplight from the windows like tiny stars against the black Wyoming night. Through the thin walls, he could hear voices, Catherine's weak but determined tone mixing with Jamie's higher pitch and Daniel's occasional whispered words. The sound of a family trying to hold itself together in the face of impossible odds made Marcus pause on the front step, suddenly uncertain about his right to intrude on their private struggle. He knocked gently, and the voices inside immediately fell silent. Footsteps approached the door, and Jamie's face appeared in the narrow gap as he opened it just wide enough to peer out. "Mr. Blackwood?" The boy's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, though he tried to hide it by standing straighter and lifting his chin with forced bravery. "I was looking for you earlier. Got something that belongs to you. May I come in, Jamie? I'd like to speak with your mother." The boy hesitated, glancing back into the cabin's dim interior. She's not feeling too good right now. Maybe you could come back tomorrow? I'm afraid tomorrow might be too late, Marcus said gently. Sheriff Coleman told me about Mr. Holt's visit. I think your family and I need to have a conversation. After a moment of internal struggle, Jamie stepped aside and let Marcus enter the small cabin. The contrast between this humble space and his own mansion struck him immediately, not because of the poverty, but because of the warmth that seemed to radiate from every corner despite the family's troubles. Catherine Morrison lay propped up in bed, her face pale but her eyes alert and wary as Marcus approached. Daniel sat beside her, still clutching his wooden horse, while Jamie moved to stand protectively near his mother's bedside. A small pile of belongings sat near the door, everything the family owned packed and ready for their planned escape into the night. Mrs. Morrison, Marcus said, removing his hat respectfully. I believe I owe you an apology. Catherine's voice was weak but clear. Mr. Blackwood, you don't owe us anything. In fact, it's the other way around. She nodded toward a small cloth pouch on the nearby table. Jamie has your money ready to return. We can't accept charity, no matter how kindly meant. Marcus looked at the pouch, knowing it contained the $20 that could mean the difference between life and death for this woman. The fact that she was willing to give it back, even while planning to flee into the dangerous wilderness, told him everything he needed to know about her character. What if it wasn't charity? He asked, the idea taking shape even as he spoke. What if it was payment for services? Catherine's eyebrows drew together in confusion. Services? Mr. Blackwood, I'm not sure what you mean. Marcus pulled up the cabin's single wooden chair and sat down, bringing himself to eye level with the family. Mrs. Morrison, I live alone in a house with 12 rooms, and I'm terrible at taking care of it. The place is dusty, disorganized, and frankly, it feels more like a tomb than a home. I need help, real help, not charity disguised as employment. Jamie stepped forward, his young face serious with consideration. What kind of help? Cleaning, organizing, basic maintenance. Someone to make sure the place feels like people actually live there instead of just storing money there. Marcus looked directly at Catherine. I know you're not well enough for heavy work, but your boys are smart and capable. They could handle most of the tasks and you could supervise, make sure things are done properly. Catherine studied his face, looking for signs of deception or pity. What would such work pay? Room and board in the house, plus $40 a month, Marcus said, the number surprising even himself. There's a comfortable suite of rooms on the ground floor that would be perfect for your family, close to the kitchen, with its own entrance so you'd have privacy. Daniel spoke up for the first time that evening. Would I be able to keep Pa's horse? Of course, Marcus assured him. In fact, there's a workshop behind the house where your father's tools are still stored. Previous owner left them behind. You might enjoy learning to carve like your pa did. The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and unspoken questions. Marcus could see Catherine weighing pride against practicality, independence against survival. Jamie looked hopeful but uncertain, while Daniel seemed more interested in the prospect of having his father's tools than in the family's housing situation. Mr. Blackwood, Catherine said finally, this is very generous, but I have to ask, why? You don't know us, and you certainly don't owe us anything. Why would you want to help strangers? The question cut straight to the heart of something Marcus had been avoiding examining too closely. Why did he care what happened to this family? Why had their plight affected him so deeply when he'd walked past countless other struggles without a second thought? Because, he said slowly, I've spent the last 20 years building wealth and accomplishing nothing that mattered. Today, when your boys were willing to sell everything they owned to help you, it reminded me what real courage looks like. I'd like to be part of something that matters for once. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her breathing shallow but her gaze sharp as she studied Marcus's face. This wouldn't be charity? It would be employment, Marcus confirmed. Fair wages for fair work. You'd be helping me as much as I'd be helping you. And if I get sicker? If I can't work at all? Marcus met her eyes steadily. Then the boys would take on more responsibility, and we'd adjust accordingly. But Mrs. Morrison, you're going to get better. That medicine you took today is going to help. And having a warm, safe place to recover is going to help even more. Jamie moved closer to his mother's bedside. Ma, we could try it. If it doesn't work out, we could always leave. Catherine looked at her sons, at Jamie's hopeful face and Daniel's quiet trust, at the packed belongings by the door, and the harsh winter night beyond their thin walls. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a decision that would change all their lives. Mr. Blackwood, if you're certain this is employment and not charity, then we accept your offer. But I want it understood that we'll earn every penny you pay us. And if we can't do the work, we'll leave with no hard feelings. Agreed, Marcus said. Feeling relief flood through him. When can you start? Catherine managed a small smile. How about tomorrow morning? I think we've had enough excitement for one night. As Marcus prepared to leave, Jamie followed him to the door. Mr. Blackwood? Thank you for everything. Marcus looked down at the boy who'd been willing to sacrifice his most precious possessions for his family's sake. Thank you, Jamie. I think you and your family are going to save me as much as I'm saving you. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but for the first time in years, Marcus Blackwood felt like he was walking toward something instead of away from it. The crash of breaking glass echoed through Marcus's mansion at dawn, followed immediately by angry shouting from the front yard that made every bird within a mile take flight in terror. Marcus bolted upright in bed, his heart hammering as he recognized Cyrus Holt's voice bellowing threats and curses that would make a sailor blush. Through his bedroom window, he could see the landlord standing beside a wagon loaded with the Morrison family's belongings, his face twisted with rage as he hurled rocks at the house. Blackwood, get out here, you interfering fool. Holt's voice carried the dangerous edge of a man who'd been drinking since the saloons opened. You think you can steal my tenants and make me look like a fool? Nobody crosses Cyrus Holt and gets away with it. Marcus threw on his clothes and raced downstairs, finding the Morrison family huddled together in the grand foyer. Catherine sat in a chair that Jamie had brought from the kitchen, her face pale with exhaustion from the early morning move. Daniel pressed close to his mother's side. His wooden horse clutched tightly as another rock struck the front window. Stay inside, Marcus ordered, grabbing his coat from the hall tree. I'll handle this. But Jamie was already moving toward the door, his young face set with determination that reminded Marcus of a soldier preparing for battle. This is our fault, Mr. Blackwood. Holt's mad because we left without paying his stupid rent. We should face him ourselves. Absolutely not, Marcus said firmly, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. This is between Holt and me now. Outside, the scene was worse than Marcus had expected. Cyrus Holt stood weaving slightly beside his wagon, a whiskey bottle in one hand and a large rock in the other. 3 other men flanked him, rough characters from the saloons who worked for Holt when he needed muscle to intimidate families behind on their rent. There he is, Holt shouted, pointing the bottle at Marcus like a weapon. The high and mighty Marcus Blackwood, stealing honest folks' tenants in the middle of the night like some common thief. Marcus stepped onto his front porch, keeping his voice calm despite the anger building in his chest. Cyrus, you're drunk and you're trespassing on my property. Take your men and leave before this gets out of hand. Out of hand? Holt laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down Marcus's spine. Boy, you ain't seen nothing yet. That family owes me money, and I'm going to collect it one way or another. One of Holt's men, a massive brute named Garrett who'd been thrown out of every decent establishment in town, stepped forward with his fists clenched. Maybe we should teach this fancy man some respect, Mr. Holt. Show him what happens when he meddles in other folks' business. Marcus felt his muscles tense, remembering the boxing lessons his father had insisted upon during his youth. He hadn't used those skills in 15 years, but muscle memory had a way of returning when needed. I'm warning you, Cyrus. Take your friends and go, or I'll have Sheriff Coleman arrest all of you for disturbing the peace. Coleman? Holt spat into the snow. That old fool's probably still sleeping off last night's poker game. Besides, what's he going to do against 4 men who say we were just returning stolen property to its rightful owners? The threat hung in the morning air like smoke from a gun barrel. Marcus realized with growing alarm that Holt had planned this confrontation carefully. The early hour, the number of witnesses on his side, the claim about stolen property. It was all designed to create a situation where Holt could do whatever he wanted without legal consequences. Behind him, Marcus heard the front door open quietly. He turned to see Jamie stepping onto the porch, despite the direct order to stay inside. The boy's face was set with the same stubborn determination that had driven him to sell his father's belongings for medicine money. "Mr. Holt?" Jamie called out, his young voice carrying clearly across the yard. "We don't owe you anything. Ma paid rent through the end of this month, and you know it." Holt's eyes lit up with cruel amusement. Well, if it isn't little Jamie Morrison, the boy who thinks $20 makes his family rich enough to break their lease." He took a long drink from his bottle. "Tell you what, boy, you and your family come back to my property right now, and I might forget about the extra fees you owe for breaking your rental agreement." "What extra fees?" Marcus demanded. "Cleaning fees, damage fees, early departure fees," Holt recited with obvious pleasure. "Comes to about $50 all told. Course, if the family can't pay in cash, there are other arrangements we could make." The way Holt looked at Catherine Morrison through the window made Marcus's blood run cold. The man's intentions were clear, and they had nothing to do with collecting legitimate debts. "That's enough," Marcus said, stepping down from the porch. "You have no claim on this family, legal or otherwise. If you don't leave my property immediately, I'll make sure the territorial marshal hears about your threats." Garrett cracked his knuckles loudly. Big words from a man who's never done a day's real work in his life. Maybe it's time someone taught you how the world really works. The situation was spiraling toward violence faster than Marcus had anticipated. He found himself weighing options, calculating odds, and wondering if his rusty fighting skills would be enough against 4 men who made their living through intimidation and force. Then Daniel appeared beside his brother, still clutching his wooden horse but standing tall despite his fear. "We're not going anywhere with you, Mr. Holt. This is our home now." The simple declaration from the youngest member of the family seemed to break something loose in the tension. Holt's face twisted with genuine rage, and he hurled his whiskey bottle at the porch, where it shattered against the wooden steps. "Your home?" he snarled. "Boy, you don't have a home. You got a rich man's charity, and charity can disappear faster than morning dew when the sun gets hot enough." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a protective instinct he'd never experienced before, combined with a rage that burned hotter than any business rivalry he'd ever faced. These children had suffered enough. They'd lost their father, nearly lost their mother, and been forced to sell their most precious possessions just to survive. Now this drunken bully wanted to drag them back into poverty and fear for his own twisted satisfaction. "Garrett?" Marcus called to the big man, surprising everyone with the steadiness of his voice. "You want to settle this man to man? Fine. But when I win, you and your friends escort Mr. Holt off my property and don't come back." Garrett grinned, showing several missing teeth. "And when I win?" Marcus looked back at the Morrison family, seeing Catherine's worried face at the window and the 2 boys standing bravely beside him despite their fear. Whatever happened next would determine not just their immediate safety, but whether they'd ever truly be free from Cyrus Holt's threats. "When you win," Marcus said quietly, "we'll discuss it then." The fight lasted exactly 37 seconds, though to Marcus it felt like hours of desperate movement punctuated by moments of crystal-clear focus that seemed to stretch time itself. Garrett charged forward with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a brawl, his massive fists swinging in wide arcs that could have felled a tree. But Marcus remembered his father's boxing instructor's first lesson. Speed and timing beat size and strength every time. "Boy." Marcus ducked under the first wild swing, felt the wind from Garrett's fist ruffle his hair, and came up with an uppercut that connected solidly with the big man's jaw. The sound was like an axe hitting hardwood, sharp and final. Garrett's eyes rolled back, his knees buckled, and he toppled backward into the snow like a felled pine tree. Silence settled over the yard like a blanket. Holt's other 2 men stared at their fallen companion, then at Marcus, who stood breathing hard but steady, his fists still raised and ready. The mine owner's expensive coat was torn at the shoulder, and his knuckles were already beginning to swell, but his eyes held a fire that made even drunk Cyrus Holt take a step backward. "Anyone else?" Marcus asked quietly. The two remaining men looked at each other, at their unconscious friend, and at Holt, who was swaying more from shock than whiskey now. Without a word, they grabbed Garrett under his arms and began dragging him toward their wagon. "This isn't over, Blackwood," Holt slurred, but his voice had lost its threatening edge. "A man like me has friends, connections. You can't protect that family forever." Marcus walked slowly toward the landlord, noting how Holt's bravado crumbled with each step. "Cyrus, let me explain something to you. I've been patient because I believe in giving people chances to do the right thing. But if you come near the Morrison family again, if you so much as speak their name in a threatening way, I will use every dollar I own and every connection I have to destroy you completely." He stopped directly in front of Holt, close enough to smell the whiskey and fear on the man's breath. "I own the bank that holds the mortgage on your rental properties. I employ half the men in this town, including the ones who shop at businesses you frequent. Cross me again, and you'll find yourself very alone in a very small town." Holt's face had gone pale beneath his whiskey flush. In his drunken rage, he'd forgotten that Marcus Blackwood wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of wealthy that could make problems disappear or create new ones with equal ease. You can't threaten me," Holt stammered. "There are laws." "There are indeed," Marcus agreed pleasantly. "Laws against harassment, trespassing, making threats, and disturbing the peace. All of which you've broken this morning in front of witnesses." He gestured toward several neighbors who had emerged from their houses to watch the commotion. Holt looked around desperately, realizing for the first time how isolated he'd become. His men were loading Garrett's unconscious form into the wagon, clearly eager to leave. The neighbors were watching him with expressions that ranged from disgust to amusement, but none showed sympathy. "This family is under my protection now," Marcus continued. "That means they're under the protection of everyone who works for me, shops at my businesses, or depends on my mines for their livelihood. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Cyrus?" The fight seemed to go out of Holt all at once. His shoulders sagged, and he looked suddenly older, smaller, like a deflated balloon. I understand. Good. Now take your men and go. If I see you on my property again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. If I hear you've bothered the Morrison family anywhere in town, you'll find yourself on the next stage out of Copper Ridge with nothing but the clothes on your back." Holt stumbled toward his wagon, his movements clumsy with defeat and alcohol. As his men helped him climb onto the driver's seat, he looked back once at the mansion where the Morrison family had found sanctuary. "You think you've won something here, Blackwood," he called out, trying to reclaim some dignity. "But families like that, they're nothing but trouble. Mark my words. They'll disappoint you in the end." Marcus watched the wagon disappear down the road, Holt's words echoing in his mind. Would the Morrison family disappoint him? Was he naive to believe that kindness and generosity would be met with loyalty and gratitude? His own father had taught him to trust no one, to expect betrayal from even those closest to him. But as he turned back toward the house, Marcus saw Jamie and Daniel running toward him, their faces bright with excitement and admiration. Behind them, Catherine Morrison stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face but smiling wider than he'd ever seen her smile. "Mr. Blackwood," Jamie shouted. "That was amazing. You knocked him down with one punch." Daniel tugged at Marcus's torn coat. "Are you hurt? Your hand's bleeding a little." Marcus looked down at his scraped knuckles, surprised to find he'd forgotten about the pain entirely. "It's nothing serious. Just a reminder that I'm out of practice." Catherine approached more slowly, her steps careful but her eyes clear and grateful. "Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time, "what you just did, standing up to Holt like that, no one's ever protected my boys the way you did today." Marcus felt embarrassment and pride warring in his chest. Any decent man would have done the same thing. "No," Catherine said firmly. Any decent man might have wanted to, but wanting and doing are two very different things. You risked yourself for our family, and we'll never forget that. Jamie was still bouncing with excitement. Did you see how scared Holt got when you threatened to ruin him? I bet he never bothers anyone in this town again. I hope you're right, Marcus said, though something in Holt's parting words nagged at him. Men like Cyrus Holt didn't give up easily, especially when they'd been humiliated in public. This might be the end of the immediate threat, but Marcus suspected it wasn't the end of their troubles. Daniel had been examining Marcus's torn coat with the serious attention of someone who understood the value of good clothing. Ma could fix this for you. She's real good with a needle. I'd be grateful for that, Marcus said, touched by the boy's practical concern. As they walked back toward the house together, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed in the past hour. He'd fought for something that mattered, protected people he cared about, and discovered that he was capable of courage he'd never known he possessed. But more importantly, he was no longer alone. For the first time since childhood, Marcus Blackwood was part of a family, not by blood, but by choice, loyalty, and mutual protection. The feeling was both thrilling and terrifying, because now he had something precious that could be lost. Behind them, the broken glass from Holt's whiskey bottle glittered in the morning sun like scattered diamonds, a reminder that even beautiful things could be dangerous when wielded by cruel hands. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later, delivered by a nervous-looking boy who refused to give his name and disappeared faster than smoke in a windstorm. Marcus found it slipped under his office door at the mining headquarters, his name written in shaky handwriting across expensive paper that seemed oddly familiar. Inside, the message was brief but chilling. Your new family has secrets that could destroy you both. Meet me at the old church ruins tonight at midnight if you want to learn the truth about Catherine Morrison's past. Marcus stared at the unsigned letter, his coffee growing cold as dozens of questions raced through his mind. What secrets could Catherine possibly have? She was a widow trying to raise her children and recover from illness. Hardly the profile of someone with a dangerous past. Yet something about the letter's tone suggested the writer possessed real information, not just malicious gossip meant to cause trouble. At the mansion, he found the Morrison family settling into their new routines with remarkable ease. Catherine, her health slowly improving with proper food and warm shelter, had taken charge of organizing the household with an efficiency that impressed even Marcus's longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Chun. Jamie had thrown himself into his studies with renewed energy, devouring every book in Marcus's library while maintaining his cleaning duties. Daniel spent his afternoons in the workshop, learning to carve under Catherine's patient guidance, his small hands growing more skilled each day as he worked with his father's tools. You're quiet today, Catherine observed as she served Marcus his lunch in the bright dining room. Something troubling you? Marcus folded the letter and slipped it into his coat pocket, unwilling to burden her with worries that might prove groundless. Just business concerns. Nothing that won't resolve itself with time. But Catherine's sharp eyes caught the movement, and he could see her mind working behind her improved complexion. Marcus, in the 3 weeks we've lived here, you've never hidden business papers from casual view. Whatever that letter contains, it's not about mining operations. Her perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised him. Catherine Morrison had survived widowhood, poverty, and serious illness through intelligence and careful observation of the people around her. She hadn't missed the worried looks that had crossed his face while reading the mysterious message. It's probably nothing, Marcus said, though his own voice lacked conviction. Someone trying to cause trouble where none exists. Jamie burst through the dining room doors at that moment, his face flushed with excitement from his afternoon lessons with the town's retired schoolmaster. Mr. Blackwood, guess what I learned today about the territorial government and how they decide which towns get? He stopped mid-sentence, picking up on the tension between the adults. Did I interrupt something important? Not at all, Catherine said quickly, though her eyes remained fixed on Marcus's troubled expression. Tell us about your lesson. As Jamie launched into an enthusiastic description of territorial politics, Marcus found himself studying Catherine's face for any hint of hidden knowledge or concealed worry. Could this woman who had shown him nothing but honesty and gratitude really be harboring secrets dark enough to threaten their newfound happiness? The afternoon dragged by with agonizing slowness. Marcus tried to focus on ledger books and mining reports, but his mind kept returning to the letter's ominous warning. By evening, he'd convinced himself that meeting the anonymous writer was the only way to put his fears to rest, even if it meant walking into a potential trap. As the family gathered for dinner, Marcus observed them with new eyes, searching for signs of deception or hidden agendas. But all he saw was Catherine helping Daniel practice his letters while Jamie read aloud from a book about American history. The scene radiated contentment and growing security, exactly what he'd hoped to provide for them. "I need to go out tonight," Marcus announced during dessert, surprising everyone including himself. "Business meeting that couldn't wait until tomorrow." Catherine's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "At night? That seems unusual." "Mining business keeps odd hours sometimes," Marcus said, hating himself for the lie even as he spoke it. "I shouldn't be gone long." Daniel looked up from his careful letter practice. "Will you be back before bedtime? I wanted to show you the horse I carved today." The boy's innocent request hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was a child who'd grown to trust him completely, excited to share his small accomplishments, while Marcus prepared to sneak off to a clandestine meeting based on anonymous accusations against the boy's mother. "I'll try," Marcus promised, meaning it despite his uncertainty about what the night might bring. As 11:30 approached, Marcus bundled himself in his heaviest coat and prepared to venture into the Wyoming darkness. The old church ruins sat on a hill outside town, the remnants of an ambitious building project that had been abandoned when the original pastor died of fever 5 years earlier. It was an isolated spot, perfect for secretive meetings or violent ambushes. The walk through the snow-covered streets gave Marcus time to consider what he might learn at the ruins. Was Catherine Morrison not who she claimed to be? Had her husband's death been something other than a mining accident? Were there debts or enemies from her past that could threaten the family's safety? As he reached the edge of town, Marcus spotted a familiar figure walking ahead of him on the same path toward the ruins. Sheriff Coleman moved with the careful gait of a man who'd received the same mysterious letter and felt equally compelled to learn its author's identity. "Fancy meeting you here," Coleman said as Marcus caught up with him. "Got an interesting piece of mail today?" "You too." Marcus felt relief and apprehension in equal measure. If Coleman had been summoned as well, the situation was either more serious than expected or more elaborate than a simple attempt at blackmail. "Someone wants us both to hear whatever they have to say about Catherine Morrison," Coleman observed. "Question is whether we're walking into truth or trouble." Together, they climbed the snowy hill toward the ruins, their breath visible in the frigid air as they approached what might be the most important conversation of their lives. Dr. Peterson stepped out from behind the crumbling church wall like a ghost materializing from winter fog. His medical bag clutched in his trembling hands, and his usually kind face twisted with guilt and desperation. Marcus felt his world tilt sideways as he realized that the town's most trusted citizen had been the anonymous letter writer, the man who'd summoned them to this isolated place under cover of darkness for reasons that suddenly seemed far more complicated than simple gossip or blackmail. "Thank you both for coming," Peterson said, his voice barely above a whisper as he glanced nervously toward the town below. "I wasn't sure you'd trust an unsigned letter, but I couldn't put my name to what I have to tell you. Too many people could get hurt if this information spreads beyond the three of us." Sheriff Coleman adjusted his coat against the biting wind that whipped through the ruined stone walls. "Doc, you've got both our attention. What's this about Catherine Morrison that's got you sneaking around like a common criminal?" Peterson set his medical bag on a fallen beam and opened it with shaking hands, revealing not medicines but a collection of yellowed papers, faded photographs, and what appeared to be official documents bearing territorial seals. "Catherine Morrison isn't who you think she is, Marcus. Her real name is Catherine Hartwell, and she's been running from something terrible for over 2 years. Marcus felt cold that had nothing to do with the Wyoming winter settling into his bones. "Running from what?" "Murder charges," Peterson said simply, his words hitting the night air like stones dropped into still water. "She's wanted by the authorities in Colorado Territory for killing a man named Vincent Carlisle." There's a $500 reward for information leading to her capture. The revelation struck Marcus like a physical blow. Catherine, who couldn't hurt a fly, who'd raised 2 gentle children and nursed sick neighbors without thought of payment. A murderer? The idea seemed so impossible that his mind refused to accept it. That's ridiculous, Marcus said firmly. You've seen how she is with her children, how she treats everyone with kindness. Catherine Morrison couldn't kill anyone. Peterson pulled out a wanted poster with a younger but unmistakable image of Catherine's face. Vincent Carlisle was her first husband, not the mining accident victim she told everyone about. According to these documents, she poisoned him with arsenic and fled Colorado Territory with her children and whatever money she could steal from his accounts. Coleman studied the poster with professional interest, his lawman's training overriding personal feelings. These look genuine, document. Where did you get them? A bounty hunter came through town last week asking questions. Showed me these papers and said he'd tracked Catherine here through her use of her late husband's medical benefits in Denver. He wanted me to confirm her identity before involving local law enforcement. Marcus snatched the poster from Coleman's hands, studying the details with desperate intensity. The woman in the photograph looked like Catherine, but younger, harder somehow. The description matched her height and coloring, but something about the whole situation felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. Even if these papers are real, Marcus said, there could be explanations. Maybe she was defending herself. Maybe Carlisle was abusive and she had no choice. Peterson's expression grew even more troubled. That's what I hope too, Marcus. Catherine's been nothing but kind to everyone in this town, and those boys of hers are as good as they come. But there's more. He pulled out another document, this one bearing the seal of a Colorado Territory court. Carlisle wasn't abusive, according to the investigation. He was wealthy, generous, well-liked in his community. The authorities believe Catherine married him for his money, then killed him when she grew tired of the arrangement. The arsenic was administered slowly over several months, making it look like a wasting illness. The details painted a picture that contradicted everything Marcus thought he knew about Catherine Morrison. Yet the evidence seemed overwhelming, documented by multiple sources and confirmed by a bounty hunter who tracked her across territorial lines. What does the bounty hunter want? Coleman asked. He's given me 1 week to decide whether to turn her in or face charges for harboring a fugitive, Peterson replied. Says he's being generous because he respects my position in the community, but his patience has limits. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, but wasn't sure whether to direct it at the bounty hunter, Peterson, or the cruel fate that had brought such an impossible choice into his life. Who else knows about this? Just the 3 of us for now. But Marcus, you need to understand something important. Peterson's voice carried the weight of professional medical knowledge. I've been treating Catherine for lung congestion, nothing more serious. She's not dying like everyone believes. The weakness, the coughing fits, they're real, but they're symptoms of prolonged stress and poor nutrition, not a fatal illness. The implication hit Marcus like thunder. Catherine had allowed everyone, including him, to believe she was seriously ill when her condition was entirely treatable with rest and proper care. Had she been manipulating his sympathy from the beginning, playing on his protective instincts to secure safety for herself and her children? There's something else, Peterson continued reluctantly. The boys might not even be hers. The wanted poster mentions that Catherine Hartwell was childless, and Vincent Carlisle had no children from previous marriages. Jamie and Daniel could be children she's collected along the way, either through deception or... He trailed off, unable to voice the darker possibilities. Marcus stared at the ruined church walls, feeling his entire world crumbling like the abandoned stone around them. The family he'd grown to love, the woman he'd begun to trust completely, the children who'd brought joy back into his empty life. Were they all elaborate lies constructed by a clever criminal who'd seen his loneliness and exploited it for her own protection? What are you going to do? Coleman asked quietly. Marcus looked at the evidence in his hands, then at the lights of Copper Ridge twinkling below where Catherine and the boys were probably getting ready for bed, trusting in his protection and generosity. In a few hours, he'd have to look into Catherine's eyes knowing what he now knew. watch Jamie practice his reading and Daniel work on his carving, all while wondering if everything about their relationship had been built on carefully constructed deception. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, his voice barely audible above the wind. "But I'm going to find out the truth, even if it destroys everything I thought I'd found." Marcus stood frozen in his study doorway at 2 in the morning, watching Catherine Morrison carefully search through his private papers by candlelight. Her movements quick and practiced like someone who'd done this many times before. The wanted poster crinkled in his coat pocket as he observed her methodical examination of his business documents, bank records, and personal correspondence, behavior that seemed to confirm every terrible suspicion Peterson's evidence had planted in his mind. Catherine looked up sharply at a floorboard's creak, her face cycling through surprise, guilt, and something that might have been relief as she spotted Marcus watching from the shadows. In the flickering candlelight, she looked exactly like the woman in the bounty hunter's photograph, harder, more calculating, capable of deception on a scale that made his chest ache with betrayal. "I suppose you're wondering what I'm doing," she said quietly, making no attempt to deny or explain away her obvious violation of his privacy. "The thought had crossed my mind," Marcus replied, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, cold and distant, nothing like the warm tone he'd used with her family for weeks. Catherine set down the papers she'd been examining and faced him directly. Her chin lifted in a gesture of defiance that reminded him uncomfortably of Jamie's stubborn courage. "How much do you know?" The question confirmed his worst fears. She wasn't going to claim innocent misunderstanding or offer explanations that might preserve some fragment of trust between them. Instead, she was calculating how much he'd discovered and what damage control might still be possible. "I know about Vincent Carlisle," Marcus said, pulling the wanted poster from his pocket and placing it on his desk between them. "I know about the murder charges in Colorado Territory. I know about the $500 bounty on your head." Catherine stared at the poster for a long moment, her face showing no surprise at its existence. "I see. And I suppose you've already decided what you're going to do with that information. Have you?" Marcus asked. "Because right now, I'm trying to understand whether anything about you and those boys has been real, or if I've been played for a fool by someone who saw a lonely man with money and decided to take advantage." Something flickered across Catherine's face, pain, perhaps, or anger at the accusation. "Those boys are real, Marcus. Whatever else you think about me, don't doubt that Jamie and Daniel are exactly who they appear to be." "According to this poster, Catherine Hartwell was childless," Marcus said, hating how his voice sounded like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "So either you stole those children, or you're not the woman they're looking for." Catherine moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape where her children slept peacefully, unaware that their world might shatter before morning. "The boys are mine, but not in the way that poster assumes. I married their father when Jamie was 6 and Daniel was 4. Their birth mother died giving birth to Daniel, and their father, well, he wasn't the kind of man who should raise children alone." Marcus felt a flicker of hope at this revelation, but Peterson's warnings about Catherine's capacity for deception kept him cautious. "And Vincent Carlisle? Was the worst mistake I ever made," Catherine said, her voice carrying a bitterness that seemed too genuine to be performed. "But not for the reasons those papers claim." She turned back to face him, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that he'd never noticed before, a hardness that spoke of experiences no decent person should have to endure. Vincent Carlisle was charming, wealthy, and absolutely convinced that owning a woman meant he could do whatever he wanted to her. The words hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Marcus recognized the careful way she'd phrased the statement, revealing just enough to suggest worse horrors without providing details that might be disputed or verified. "The boy's father died in a mining accident, just like I told everyone," Catherine continued. "But I was pregnant with another man's child when it happened. Vincent offered to marry me, give the baby a name, provide for all of us. It seemed like salvation at the time." Marcus sat down heavily in his leather chair, the weight of revelations pressing down on his shoulders. "What happened to the baby?" Catherine's face went pale. "I lost the child 3 months into the marriage. Vincent." He wasn't pleased about becoming a stepfather to boys who weren't his blood. After I lost the baby, his interest in playing family disappeared entirely. So you killed him, Marcus said flatly. I defended myself and my children, Catherine corrected, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Vincent had particular ideas about discipline and obedience. The boys started having nightmares, flinching when adults raised their voices. Jamie stopped talking for 2 weeks after Vincent corrected his table manners with a belt. Marcus found himself caught between sympathy and suspicion. Catherine's story explained much about her desperation to protect her children, but it also conveniently painted her as a victim forced into violence rather than a calculating murderer driven by greed. The authorities didn't see it that way, he observed. Catherine laughed bitterly. Vincent Carlisle donated generously to the territorial judge's election campaign. He was well-connected, respected, and very careful about maintaining his public image. When I tried to report his treatment of the boys, I was told that discipline was a father's right and I should be grateful for his guidance. She moved closer to Marcus's desk, her movements careful and non-threatening despite the tension crackling between them. The night he died, Vincent had been drinking heavily. He decided that Daniel needed to learn respect through fear, and he came after my boy with a fireplace poker. Marcus felt his stomach clench at the image her words created. I hit Vincent with a cast-iron pan to stop him from hurting Daniel, Catherine continued. Hit him harder than I intended, but not hard enough to kill him outright. He fell, struck his head on the hearth, and died 3 days later from his injuries. The authorities ruled it murder? They ruled it suspicious death, conducted a brief investigation, and decided that a woman who'd inherit her husband's considerable wealth had obvious motives for violence. Catherine's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent years running from an unjust verdict. Vincent's friends convinced the law that I'd been poisoning him slowly and simply finished the job when impatience overcame caution. Marcus studied her face, searching for signs of deception in her expression. The story was plausible, even sympathetic, but it was also exactly the kind of explanation a guilty person might construct to gain sympathy and protection. Why should I believe you? He asked. Catherine reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in faded cloth. Unwrapping it revealed a silver locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful in its intricate design. This belonged to the boy's birth mother, she said, opening the locket to reveal 2 tiny portraits, one of Jamie as a baby, one of Daniel. Vincent tried to sell it along with everything else that reminded him of her. I bought it back secretly and kept it safe for them. She placed the locket on Marcus's desk beside the wanted poster. A woman motivated by greed doesn't spend her escape money preserving keepsakes for children who aren't even her blood. But a mother protecting her family does whatever she must to keep them safe. Marcus stared at the locket, then at Catherine's face, then at the wanted poster with its harsh accusations and official seals. Somewhere in this tangle of evidence and emotion lay the truth, but determining which version to believe might be the most important decision he'd ever make. The sound of small footsteps on the stairs shattered the tense silence between Marcus and Catherine, followed by Daniel's frightened voice calling out in the darkness for his mother. Catherine's carefully composed mask cracked instantly, revealing the genuine maternal concern that Marcus had witnessed dozens of times during their weeks together. The kind of automatic, protective response that seemed impossible to fake convincingly. I'm here, sweetheart, Catherine called softly, moving toward the study door. Bad dream. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his wooden horse clutched tightly against his chest and his hair sticking up in all directions from sleep. His eyes were wide with the particular fear that came from waking alone in an unfamiliar place, and when he spotted Marcus sitting behind the desk, his expression shifted to confusion at the strange late-night meeting. Ma? Why are you awake? Did something happen to the mine? Daniel's voice carried the worry of a child who'd learned too young that adult conversations in the middle of the night usually meant trouble for the family. Marcus watched Catherine's face as she knelt down to Daniel's level, her movements gentle and reassuring despite the crisis that had been unfolding moments before. The transformation was complete and immediate. from a woman discussing murder charges to a mother comforting her frightened child without missing a beat. "Nothing's wrong with the mine, baby," Catherine said, smoothing Daniel's messy hair. "Mr. Blackwood and I were just talking about some grown-up business. You go back to bed, and I'll be up to tuck you in properly in just a few minutes." But Daniel's attention had shifted to the papers scattered across Marcus's desk, his young eyes picking out details that adults might miss. "Ma, that lady in the picture looks like you, but her hair's different." Marcus felt his heart stop as Daniel pointed at the wanted poster with innocent curiosity. Catherine's face went pale, but she kept her voice steady as she gently turned her son away from the desk. "People can look alike sometimes, sweetheart, just like how you and Jamie both have your father's chin." She guided him toward the door with practiced maternal efficiency. "Now back to bed before Jamie wakes up and wants to know why everyone's having a party without him." Daniel giggled at that image, his fear forgotten in the face of his mother's calm presence. "Can I show Mr. Blackwood my new carving tomorrow? I almost finished the rabbit you taught me to make." "We'll see," Catherine said diplomatically. "Sleep first, carving later." As Daniel's footsteps faded up the stairs, Catherine returned to face Marcus with renewed determination. The brief interruption had reminded both of them what was truly at stake, not just Catherine's freedom or Marcus's trust, but the security and happiness of two children who'd already lost too much. "You see how they are," Catherine said quietly. "Jamie and Daniel have never known any mother but me. Whether or not that gives me legal claim to them, it gives me moral responsibility for their welfare." Marcus found himself thinking about his own childhood, about the servants who'd raised him while his father built his business empire. Blood relationships meant nothing if they lacked love and protection, while chosen families could provide bonds stronger than any legal document. "There's something else you should know," Catherine continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone making a final confession. "I wasn't searching through your papers tonight to steal from you or gather information for some criminal purpose." She moved back to his desk and picked up a specific document she'd been examining when he'd discovered her. "I was looking for proof of what I suspected about your own past, Marcus, about why a man with your wealth and intelligence chooses to live alone in a town like Copper Ridge." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. "What do you mean?" Catherine held up a legal document bearing his father's signature and several official seals. "Your father didn't just abandon you emotionally after your mother died, did he? He legally disowned you when you refused to follow his business methods, cut you off completely, and forced you to build your own fortune from nothing." The accuracy of her deduction hit Marcus like a physical blow. His father's rejection had been the defining wound of his adult life, the reason he'd fled east to make his own way in the mining territories rather than accept the inheritance that came with strings he couldn't bear. "How did you?" "Because I recognized the look in your eyes when you watched Jamie and Daniel," Catherine said gently. "It's the same look I see in my mirror when I remember what it feels like to be truly part of a family. You're not helping us out of pity, Marcus. You're helping us because we represent what you've been searching for your entire adult life." Marcus stared at the document in her hands, remembering the day his father had signed those papers with cold satisfaction. He said, "I was too soft for real business, too concerned with what happened to the people whose lives we affected. And now you've built a fortune anyway, using methods that let you sleep at night," Catherine observed. "Your employees are paid fairly, their families are housed decently, and the town prospers along with your mines. You've proven that strength and compassion aren't mutually exclusive." The conversation had taken a turn Marcus hadn't expected. Instead of defending her actions, Catherine was somehow analyzing his motivations and revealing insights about his character that he'd never shared with anyone. "Why does that matter?" he asked. Catherine set the document back on his desk and met his eyes directly. "Because it means you understand why I did what I did to protect my children. You know what it's like to be rejected by someone who should have loved you unconditionally. You know what it's like to build a new life from the ashes of old disappointments." Marcus felt the weight of recognition settling over him. Catherine was right. He did understand the desperation that drove someone to extreme measures when protecting what mattered most. His own choices had been less dramatic but no less fundamental, choosing exile and hard work over compromise with values he couldn't accept. "The bounty hunter," Marcus said finally. "Peterson said he'd given you 1 week." 3 days left, Catherine confirmed. "I was hoping to find something in your papers that might help us disappear again before he loses patience. Money, contacts, anything that might give the boys and me a head start toward somewhere safe." Marcus looked at the wanted poster, then at Catherine's face, then at the legal document that proved his own painful history with family rejection and forced independence. 3 days to decide whether to trust a woman who might be a murderer or might be a mother who'd made impossible choices in an impossible situation. "What if we didn't run?" Marcus asked slowly. Catherine's eyebrows rose in surprise. "What do you mean? What if we found another way to solve this problem? A way that didn't involve hiding or running or separating your family?" For the first time since he'd caught her searching his papers, Catherine smiled, a real smile that transformed her face from tired desperation to something approaching hope. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. Marcus looked out the window at the snow-covered town where he'd built his fortune and his reputation, then back at the woman who'd brought purpose and family into his solitary life. Whatever Catherine Morrison's past might hold, whatever mistakes she might have made, he was certain of one thing. The future they might build together mattered more than the shadows they'd leave behind. "I have an idea," he said, "but it's going to require trust from both of us, and it might be the biggest gamble either of us has ever taken."